Hello everyone. So I wanted to do a video talking about the first couple weeks of Biden's presidency, some decent things that happened now that the Democrats are in all branches of government pretty much, except for the Supreme Court, of course, that Trump has somehow jammed in three Supreme Court justices in his 4 years. But now that the Democrats, you know, it it wasn't exactly a overwhelming victory in the last election. I mean, Biden, of course, he got more votes than any other person in modern, history. Um, and he won. He got like around. It was probably around like 7.3, I think, something like that. It wasn't quite 8 million, I think, but around 7.2 or 3 million more votes than Trump did. And that's nothing to scoff at. I mean, that certainly seems to be a repudiation of Trump, and just completely disavowing that toxicity and white supremacy and everything that Trump stood for. I mean, it's worth noting that Trump never had a 50% approval rating in his entire presidency. He never had that. So, that certainly goes to show that our democracy is not a democracy at all. I mean, it's not based in anything like that. It's has nothing to do with who gets the most votes. I mean, first of all, so but okay, we want to look at what's going on with the Democrats and judge the good and the bad. I feel it's incumbent upon me to be objective and point out when there's good things that happen, and I'm going to criticize when I think that things are not going the right way, and people are being harmed as a result of it, of these policies that Biden is pursuing, or if he's leaving what Trump did untouched in certain regards, then that's not good. So I want to point that out. So I'm trying to be as nuanced and even-handed as possible. You see, the thing is, just like, people kind of conflate that criticism of Democrats and liberals, and they think like, oh, you're not being understanding, and like you don't appreciate the lesser evilism argument. No, I understand that pretty well, and I know that the Democrats are better than the Republicans. Like, that's not the issue. My concern is that as they pursue things that are detrimental to people, that essentially allow suffering to continue, and it's a lack of competence in a lot of ways, because they just, as I'll get into more, like, they just drag their feet on a lot of things and take too long, and try and compromise and work with Republicans when it's ridiculous, and they should not be doing that, because it's wasting time during this urgent crisis in our country. So that perception, I think that when people see that, they don't have much faith in the Democrats. And so, look, if you're gonna complain about like the third party voters, or people who are not coming out to vote and feel like their vote doesn't count, or that kind of thing, like they don't want to participate in the system, they feel like it's corrupt. It's it's up to the Democrats to prove that to them, no, we can provide things for you. We show you materially how we've improved your lives. So, and frankly, the Democrats, they have to be effective at conveying that. It's not just a matter of doing it, to be honest. Because Obamacare, again, I'm not the biggest fan of the Affordable Care Act. It didn't go far enough, but it did increase the amount of people that were insured. It was a step in the right direction to some degree, because it helped with the Medicaid expansion. People, less people were suffering and maybe even died as a result of like the Medicaid expansion. Excuse me. Um, but the thing is, yeah, like, is that enough to, long term show people we trust the Democrats to lead the country? And the evidence shows that after Obama left office, like, we lost thousands of seats in the House. We lost the Senate. I mean, we lost the Senate before Obama left office. I'm pretty sure that was the case in the midterms, like, because in 2012 I think they took it back, and in 2014 they lost in the midterms. But then they lost the presidency to Trump. So, you know, I think the Democratic legacy like often leaves that void of just like people don't feel like their lives have improved any, and this has been the case for decades. So that's why we have this cycle of just back and forth shifting power. But okay, let's get into the specifics. So Biden halted the construction of the Keystone XL pipeline, and I don't know if this is part of a direct, like a specific executive action he took, but he has said that he's not for fracking on federal land, and I think that's good. He re-entered the Paris Climate Accords, and with that, even that's not really binding. Like, there's no enforcement mechanisms to make sure that any of the countries are abiding by that deal. The thing is, I know that those are good steps, and it's a shame that climate change, in the wake of the pandemic, this issue of climate change gets put to the wayside, and we just don't even really talk about it as much. Um, but yeah, I mean, we need to be more bold. We need the Green New Deal. We need to start investing in renewable energy. And I know it doesn't happen overnight. We have a lot of fossil fuel jobs all across the world, but I mean, especially in our country, we care about the jobs in our own country, right? So if the argument is, oh, these people, they work in coal, they work in oil, or whatever, like, what are you going to do with them? You can have a plan, and it can work in phases. It can, so it's not. I know it doesn't happen overnight, but it's not sustainable to be going down this path of just depleting our fossil fuel reserves, which are not infinite. It's not going to last forever, anyways. So, and you're just destroying the planet. So, we need to be much more bold. And if you want to get to that long term thing, where 12 years, I don't know, 15 or 20 years down the line, we have zero carbon emissions or whatever goal you set. If it's 2050, if you want to get to that, you have to start planning now. You have to start investing in the future now. This is kind of like a make or break point. And so these moments now and what we decide to prioritize are going to dictate what's happening 10 years from now. I really do believe that. So, again, a step in the right direction, it's minimization of harm, and that's that lesser evilism again, but we just need more bold leadership. It needs to take the form of something that is going to benefit the working class too, and we can assure people, yes, you will have a job. You are going to have a job with a living wage that's actually going to be productive for building a better future. That's what the Green New Deal should be about. So Biden started a Buy America initiative, which, he stole this idea from Trump kind of, but I feel like Biden is actually doing it better, and he's just more coordinated. But it's not even that. I mean, just because Trump, his whole America First thing, that it was like a Buy America week, and it was just not enough. It was not what it was cracked up to be, where he's like, oh, we're completely reinvigorating U.S. manufacturing. And, again, you can point to a lot of anecdotal examples, but there's also examples of like a steel mill in Pittsburgh going under because of the tariffs, or the Trump tariffs that were imposed. Um, there's stories you could pull of from either thing. Look at Carrier. He like Trump said he was gonna make Carrier keep these jobs in the country, and they were trying to ship them out to Mexico, I believe. And once Trump got elected, he said, like, Carrier, you're gonna do this. You're gonna keep the jobs here in America. And it was like, yeah, we're gonna do it, but then they ended up shipping out the jobs anyway and laying off people. So it's a lot of talk and rhetoric, but there's not a lot of follow through with Trump. And so with Biden, I don't know how much tougher he would be on trying to limit the amount of outsourcing. A lot of the Republicans think like he has a nefarious relationship with China, so who knows, really, honestly. But I think this plan is still good. I mean, he's obviously putting it forward as an issue to buy more American products and invest more in American jobs, and I think that's good. So we should try and reinvigorate U.S. manufacturing to the best of our ability. So Biden ended all DOJ contracts with private prisons, which is a good step in the right direction, again, but it doesn't account for other government agencies, such as ICE, and 60% of their detention centers, which, if you know me, probably not a big surprise, but these things are actually concentration camps. Let's be, real here. Kids have died in ICE custody, and, I don't know how you can look at that and ever think that that's okay. It doesn't matter if you did anything wrong. If you want to say it's justified that kids are in cages, okay, but how do we get to a point where people are detained and watched over by U.S. officials, like law enforcement officials, and there's even cases of rape happening, and kids have died in ICE custody. Again, I'm going to say it because it's true, and that is deplorable. That's what's really deplorable. But the thing is, when push comes to shove, the liberals they don't have much of a change in policy when it comes to immigration, because there's just nothing tangible ever. It's always been this amorphous thing, like, oh, immigration reform, what are we going to do? Because they talk around the issue and they don't ultimately have that much of a difference. It's all in the optics. Trump did this border wall, which was just a kind of extravaganza that didn't do much of anything. It's like they talked about oh, it's cutting down on the amount of drugs coming into the country. Well, that's not how drugs come into the country. I mean, it's like, I don't know. It's like how even accurate this is. If you've ever seen the movie Sicario, it seems apparent. But they have like systems of tunnels that go underneath the ground. But also from reality, I know because I've read about this. Like a lot of the drugs that get smuggled into the country, they come through legal border crossings, and that's why they have drug sniffing dogs at the border. They have all that stuff. Like they sneak it in because it's easier to try and like go through legally and just be sneaky about it than doing something crazy like going out in the desert and then like what are you doing there, like. So anyways, I'm getting off on all kinds of tangents here. Don't let anyone, whether it be the media, whether it be liberal politicians, don't let them gaslight you into thinking that Biden he has his hands tied. There's nothing he can do about kids in cages, anyone in cages. I mean, in these conditions, and they didn't do anything wrong. I mean, it's not, you're treating these people as if they're all violent criminals, but that's not the case. It's just not true. Um, so if you want to show us that you're different than Trump, Biden, then do it. You have to put an end to this horrific policy, because it is modern day fascism in America. We had concentration camps for Japanese Americans during the World War II, and now we do the same thing, and it's just with a different group of people. Biden rescinded Trump's travel ban, which is good. It was just a simply racist policy, and I've talked about that before, but it's not even debatable to me, because it was aimed at these Muslim majority countries, but there were specific provisions that basically said, like, if you were a Christian in this said country that's on the ban list, then it's okay for you to come as a refugee or immigrate into this country. So that clearly is targeting a specific group of people and painting them with a broad brush, and painting them like they're terrorists. And it's just based on nothing. Especially when you look at the fact, like, our immigration system for becoming a refugee, it's incredibly lengthy. It doesn't just happen overnight. It takes multiple months and background checks to go through this process, and that's with asylum too. Like, when you're crossing the border and you seek asylum, it takes time in order for that to get certified. So it was just based on nothing that it was like, oh, it's like open season and anyone can just come into the country, and they don't have to show who they are or whatever. There's no mechanisms to make sure that we're checking people who are acting nefariously. Like, they act like there's no surveillance state in this country, and we don't have U.S. imperialism rampant all over the world, and we have the technology to, like, look at people who are intending to do us harm. So it's amazing to me that we live in this heightened sense of hysteria ever since 9/11, to be honest, and that was what led to the massive surveillance state that we have, and it was kind of the argument of we give up our freedoms in order to stay safe. And sorry, almost dropped my phone. The idea being, like, we have this crazy country and system where we can do whatever we want. I mean, because we just invade countries like crazy and go wherever we want and kill innocent civilians, and we have the capabilities, again, like I'm saying, like, to spy on people, anyone. And despite that, like, we still don't feel safe, of course, and so it comes down to bigotry then for a lot of people, and they scapegoat certain groups of people and say, you're part of this group, you're look like someone who did 9/11, so I'm going to assume that you're like a terrorist. And it is racism. So I just want to say that is good that Biden rescinded that. And I would say too, the symbolic stuff, like on paper, the policies should shift away from racism and white supremacy. I agree, but also our actions have to follow through as well. And leading into that, Biden on foreign policy has been pretty bad. honestly. Um, so he's recognizing Juan Guaido as president of Venezuela, which is kind of silly to me more than anything because it's just not true. Like Maduro runs Venezuela, he has a military, like he is the one in charge of the country. Juan Guaido is some dude with like he has like maybe some militias on his side in the street. It's a diet coup. It's just like the attempted insurrection, January 6th. If that, just imagine what happened on January 6th, and Juan Guaido is leading that movement and like storming the Capitol. That's what goes on in Venezuela, pretty much. Um, so it's just silly. It's not based in reality. Like you recognizing this random dude as the leader of Venezuela is not helpful. It just doesn't do anything, and I don't know. Just why should we be escalating tensions with Venezuela in the first place? To be honest, I don't know. Um, Another thing is Biden is refusing to re-enter the Iran deal, and he's putting all of the burden on Iran. Even though we violated the deal, and I looked into the details of that because I wasn't quite sure even at the time like how this came about, but basically Congress passed sanctions on Iran December of 2016, so it was after Trump got elected, and so they passed these sanctions, and Obama didn't sign it into law, but he just let it come and become law anyways. It's just a wonky technical provision because in certain cases, if Congress is not in session and the president doesn't sign it, it doesn't become law. But since Congress was in session, then it by definition it just became law without his signature. So it's so typical of Obama too, because he's just like giving a nothing answer. He's not gonna sign it into law. He's not gonna veto it. He's gonna do this in between thing that's like diplomatic and yes, I'm just abdicating all of my responsibility to Congress. All right. So yeah, and then Trump, of course, exited the Iran deal when he became president. So we acted in bad faith here, and now Biden is trying to act all tough and start dictating the terms of what's going to happen. And I just think, given the context of everything that unfolded, that is very hawkish, and again, escalating tensions with Iran. So, is it good? So far, we haven't had like military strikes or whatever, because Trump assassinated the General Soleimani um, about a year ago, and that was deemed as like a pretty big deal. Like it almost kind of sparked a bigger conflict with us in Iran, and it's like, yeah, I am glad that it's not kind of unexpected chaos like it is with Trump, and so far like things have been kind of more tame under Biden, but it's still escalating tensions in terms of the rhetoric, and it's not it's antithetical to diplomacy is what I'm trying to say. So how different is it ultimately than Trump? It's like, yeah, we can build bridges again with our allies, and they didn't have trust in our country and their resolve because Trump was the leader. So it's like, yeah, okay, now they're happy that Biden is here. But in terms of our enemies, there's this inclination to be tough, and I'm a strong leader. I'm Biden. Woo. Well, if that ends up becoming, I have to show a show of force, I have to, act in a military fashion, then yeah, I'm not for that. And that is honestly not that different from Trump and what he does, or what he did throughout his presidency. Um, then, still on foreign policy here, Biden is delaying the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And I'll let ABC News explain most of it. So, Biden administration likely to keep U.S. troops in Afghanistan amid escalating violence stalled talks. A new watchdog report warns U.S. troops face limitations after Trump's drawdown. Amid a surge in high profile assassinations and violent attacks, the Biden administration is indicating it will keep U.S. troops in Afghanistan past a May withdrawal deadline laid out in the U.S. deal with the Taliban, and that was with Trump still in office. So, President Joe Biden has talked about keeping U.S. forces for counterterrorism or to defend the U.S.-backed Afghan government against a rise in Taliban attacks, but it's unclear under what conditions, to what end, and for how long after America's nearly 20 years of war. I mean, this is now our longest war, I'm pretty sure. It's longer than Vietnam, and what is our goal there, as I'll get into. But U.S. troops are at their lowest level in Afghanistan now, which the Pentagon said in a new report Monday has imposed limitations on completing its mission. In addition to 2,500 U.S. troops, that's what we have. U.S. allies have approximately 8,000 service members in the country under NATO command. Reuters reported Sunday that the alliance is planning to keep those troops in Afghanistan beyond the May deadline, but NATO spokesperson Ona Lungescu, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, told ABC News, no decision has been made. No NATO ally wants to stay in Afghanistan longer than necessary, but we have been clear that our presence remains conditions-based. Allies continue to assess the overall situation and to consult on the way forward. So that to me is almost like doublespeak. It's like, yeah, like we don't want to stay there longer than we have to. Well, we already there. We're there longer than we had to be. We killed Osama bin Laden. And what year was that? 2012 or something? Like, that was 9 years ago now. Excuse me. So, what is the intention of our presence there? We're trying to keep the peace? Well, we often kill civilians, and I know people act like that's just, out there crazy, like it can never happen with the perfect and good U.S. No, we're the heroes, right? But no. If you looked at what was going on, even under Obama, like 90% of drone strikes don't hit their intended targets. And that often led to civilian casualties. Hundreds of thousands of people died in Iraq. And I don't know what the number is for Afghanistan, but it's frustrating to me because Trump, he laid out this plan that was going to be a full withdrawal by May of this year. And, like, if I'm going to be generous, okay, I do think Trump kind of did it for the optics. And he was like, okay, I think if I withdraw troops, people will look at some semblance of my legacy and be like, okay, that was kind of good. He ended this war. But, again, a lot of people just want to be the opposite of Trump. And that's what I think Blue MAGA is, to be honest. It's just worshiping the Democrats and not questioning anything they say or do. It's just kind of like putting your trust in them because you feel like they're the adults and the experts. That's all it is. Because, to be honest, look, are we supposed to just completely get rid of the Taliban? Are we supposed to wipe them out off the face of the earth? Because they're just going to continue to exist. They have a struggle against the Afghanistan government, and what is that? How does that affect our national security? And why should we be sacrificing American soldiers' lives um, to and spending money, throwing money into a bottomless pit while we have people suffering here in our own country? Um, we need to prioritize things better. And frankly, because like I don't want to sound like a broken record, but we have just a record of killing innocent civilians. We overthrow democratically elected governments a lot of the time. We did it in Iran. We did it all throughout South America. So this idea that we have a moral standing as the world's policeman is really kind of ridiculous and not based on anything. So we just should not be in Afghanistan any longer. Um, the Taliban, I mean, this idea that like if we're gonna withdraw, there's gonna suddenly be an attack here on the homeland, that is not based on anything. People, I think, are still stuck in this kind of hysteria where it's like, oh, if we're not constantly in the Middle East with a military presence, then we're gonna be open backed up for a terror attack. Well, at least with the Taliban, I don't think that's the case. Um, they don't have intentions of attacking here. Their concern is controlling Afghanistan. And I'm not saying that it's right that they go after the Afghanistan government. I mean, we should try and help the Afghanistan government, I guess, to the extent that we can. But I'm not for this constant arguing for endless war. There's just no actual goal being presented. Because I just want them to say, at this point, we can leave. That's it. And I think it's because they know there is nothing that they can say. Get rid of the Taliban, but like it's easier said than done. What are you gonna do? So that is a huge problem. And Biden, it's the same old thing with Biden. It's not any different from Bush, from Obama, from Trump. It's the U.S. war machine keeps on chugging. So that's just not good. So now let's get to the handling of the pandemic and relief bill, which I think has been very lackluster for the most part. In terms of the vaccine right now, Biden has opened it up to pretty much a first come first serve basis, and so let me go to CNN quick to give some more detail. President-elect Joe Biden, so I guess this was probably written before he took office, but excuse me. Joe Biden will aim to release nearly every available dose of the coronavirus vaccine when he takes office, a break with the Trump administration's strategy of holding back half of U.S. vaccine production to ensure second doses are available. Releasing nearly all vaccine doses on hand could quickly ratchet up the availability of coronavirus vaccines by allowing more people access to a first dose. It could also be a risky strategy as both Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna's vaccines require two doses administered at specific intervals, and vaccine manufacturing has not ramped up as rapidly as many experts had hoped. And so that is pretty key to note, because if there is no concrete plan to increase the amount of vaccines in production that are out there, then excuse me, the problem is people who get the first dose and then they can't get the second dose. It's not available anywhere. Your vaccine is pretty much worthless then. And so, you're pretty much just making it harder on average people through no fault of their own. Because, once you get the first dose, I think it just makes common sense that they should reserve one for that person. So, to make sure that they're getting what they I don't know if it's I don't think it's free, right? So, if you pay for something, you should be able to get the full extent of that product, right? It's like, um, so it might, it kind of sounds like a good thing to like open up the amount of vaccines available to people so that more people can get them, but it could end up being detrimental because of how that leaves certain people out in the cold when they can't get their second dose. Um, there has to be kind of a contingency for that, I think. And, the problem is, like I say, if we had a definite idea of how we can ramp up production soon, then maybe that would be okay. And we, can see down the line, yeah, by this date, we should definitely have more vaccines. But the Democrats in general have been dragging their feet on getting this relief bill through. And I'll say, for one thing, it's not really hard to argue that they should have made a standalone bill for the stimulus checks, because they made that promise pretty clear. Like, we're going to get you $2,000 checks, not 1,400. Again, I'll say, but whatever. They should have done it. Get it done as quickly as possible in a standalone bill. And frankly, I mean that would have been better in terms of the politics, having the Republicans on record as saying they don't want to send out stimulus checks to people. I think that would be valuable politically to have Republicans on record for that. But even if it was going to be all lumped in together into this $1.9 trillion plan, they should have just started through reconciliation right away to make sure that it got done as quickly as possible. But because Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, they don't want to get rid of the filibuster, and Biden won't do anything about it, like, who ultimately takes the responsibility for the delayed rollout of this relief? And again, it's just absurd to care about bipartisanship in the middle of a pandemic, emergency, depression. These are all words that apply, and the urgency is not really being responded to in an appropriate way. It's like, not to mention, there was an attempted insurrection, and the Democrats are trying to impeach Trump over it. So how do you even hold those two thoughts together? Because I guess they just view Trump as an aberration, and like, he's not representative of the Republican Party as a whole, even though we're seeing crazy QAnon people now in Congress. So there's clearly a growing base of people that support those kind of beliefs. So there's that sense of like, oh, we gotta hold Trump to account, but we do need so much sorry, cannot talk. Bipartisanship and unity. Yeah. Not good stuff. Just because the thing is, for one thing, it's never bipartisanship on things that benefit the American people, average people. It's always on stuff that is detrimental and stuff that is good for corporations and the military-industrial complex. But again, like I say, like, why are we wasting time with political theater and trying to, beat the filibuster? Like, to the idea that you were going to get 10 Republicans to vote for this, have you been awake for the past, 12 years when we saw how they obstructed Obama over everything, over their own healthcare proposal? The ACA, that was a right-wing plan historically, backed by Mitt Romney, Newt Gingrich, all these people. So to act like the Republicans were going to work with you, that you were going to get 10 votes in the Senate and beat the filibuster. I mean, stop kidding yourself. I mean, you want to talk about pie in the sky? They always say Bernie Sanders, oh, he's so pie in the sky, all this stuff's not going to ever happen. Well, you think the Republican fever is going to break now that Biden is in charge? Just wait and see how things go, and look at with Marjorie Taylor Greene again, like all these crazies that are in Congress now. It's not going to go well, believe me. It's not worth your effort. So, I also want to say that it's worth noting that the $2,000 checks, that line was very likely what pushed the Democrats over the top in Georgia, and therefore winning their slim majority in the Senate. And again, they're watering down the relief bill. They're compromising up front and showing their true cards, and like it's just all a joke. And I want to make a correction because in my last video I made a mistake. They're means testing the stimulus check by lowering the threshold for people who receive the full amount if they made $70,000 a year or less. Then they would get the full 1,400 in this case. But now they want to lower that number to 50,000, not 5,000. That was my bad. But that is not good, because even people who are making 70,000 a year, that, they're still going to be suffering during this time, during this pandemic depression. It's not good for a vast variety of people. So I don't like this idea of cutting more people out. It should be universal, pretty much, this stimulus check. And so, on the flip side, there is some rhetoric that is pleasing to hear, like Chuck Schumer said, we aren't going to make the same mistakes as 2009 and reach out to Republicans. And I mean, look, it took like 2 weeks of trying to beat the filibuster and work with Republicans to get this big plan passed, and then they switched to pursuing reconciliation. So, I'm glad that they're taking that approach now, but it takes a certain amount of hours of debate, to get through this whole process. So again, it's just taking too much time, and I think that is probably going to leave a bad taste in people's mouths. I mean, who even knows if this will get passed this month? It could be mid-March. They even floated like April it could come out. So it doesn't exactly instill confidence in people that they are good at governing. We have impeachment ramping up, and who knows how that's going to go. I mean, there's going to be some trial of some sort, and if there's going to be witnesses and who's allowed to call the shots, I don't know. But like I say, it's just like the Democrats, they always brag about being able to get things done, and then when they're in power, they can't chew gum and walk at the same time. It just shows a certain amount of incompetence to me. And I don't even know if it's that. It's more just they handicap themselves by trying to go through this dance of working with Republicans that like, oh, we want to seem reasonable and extend our olive branch, and like, they're not going to work with you. Like, when are you going to get it through your head? Okay? And besides, I mean, like, it's more important to just get things done right now. It's an emergency. You can't be wasting time while we're in this race against time. So, from a strategy standpoint, Biden, he has to be the new FDR and twist people's arms in order to get things done. But I know he won't do that. He's just kind of a, live and let live person. And in the absence of that, I am concerned that as we see this race against time with the virus and increasing vaccine distribution, and there's more dangerous mutations coming out of the virus that are more contagious. Um, and on top of it, this whole relief bill, which has kind of everything tied in together, it's taking too long. And again, that's because of the approach that they took. It seems like the perfect storm to me. Again, it's not all that different from Trump in some regards. It's just all these factors that could spell disaster if it's not addressed in a serious way very soon. Um, and I think it's very disingenuous to see how the CDC is saying that we should reopen schools now, even though they said it was irresponsible under Trump. Um, and like now that Biden is president, nothing has actually changed about the pandemic. I mean, like the numbers are honestly even worse, and we have like nearly 500,000 people dead now in this country. So just like what was the reasoning behind CDC now coming out and saying we can open schools safely? It was just a exchange in leadership, in my view, honestly. So I think there is this kind of return to normalcy in terms of the institutions, which I guess I'd anticipated it, but I didn't know it was going to be like this brazen, if you will, that it's just like going along with the program and not really questioning anything. We see it in the media too, and it's like they were very adversarial towards the Trump administration for many good reasons, and some of them probably silly ones too, because I mean Russiagate, like what did that even yield? Like what did that even end up being in terms of the situation we're in now? Like that, it meant nothing in the end. It was a nothing story, to be honest. The things that really where there was a there in terms of the Russia story was like obstruction of justice. And I mean, like it was, we all knew this if you looked at the Mueller report. Like that they said that there was no evidence of collusion, but they didn't clear Trump on obstruction of justice. I mean, he is just the kind of person that doesn't want to be investigated into. I mean, it doesn't even seem that hard to understand. It's not as if there was this massive conspiracy and Putin and Trump work together and Trump is really a Manchurian candidate. That is absurd. There was probably corrupt business dealings, and Russian oligarch money could have been involved or whatever. Like I'm not denying that there was no connection. I'm not denying that there was a connection. Excuse me. Between Trump and Russia. I mean that probably is the case, but they were trying to make it out to be like Trump was doing Putin's bidding and acting on behalf of Russia. And if that was the case, if like Putin is like pulling the strings and everything, like, well, what good did that do anyone? I mean, it's gone. The whole idea is gone now. Trump is gone. So again, I think the opposite being true with Biden and the media is bad, because the media basically treats Biden and Jen Psaki, who's the press secretary, it's with kid gloves. They play patty cakes, and it's because there's this veneer of they're in they have an experience in government, they're respectable, and they're truth tellers or whatever. It's like, that's just your opinion, dude. I mean, it's based on you just worship elitism, essentially. Like these people have been in the same circles for decades. And yeah, the role of the media is to be adversarial. Definitely, like they have to hold people to account and not just believe them at their word. So I think that happens now with a lot of the media that you see. Like when Fox News asks a tough question, they're trying to do this like dumb gotcha game or something, and maybe like bring up like a Trump accomplishment and try and say like why is Biden ruining this or whatever it is. It's always a pretty dumb question. They've been tending to send Steve Ducey, or I'm not sure. I think it's Peter Ducey is the son of Steve Ducey. I'm not even sure, but they're both Ducey bags. Anyways, um, the adverse effects of having a media that's not going to be watchful over what the Biden administration is doing, um, and rightfully saying when it's not acting in the American on the American people's behalf. That void, it just leaves people being uninformed, and like I said, like a sense of accountability, and it's completely forgetting the fact that like it's all these people lie to you. They're politicians, so it doesn't matter if they're Republican or Democrat. You can't just take them at their word. You have to hold them to account. You have to say, okay, you made this promise. Now you have to, follow through with the promise. And as time goes on, that's what this race against time is. With the virus, that is just the loss of life and basically a hindrance to our way of life as we know it. It's that's what's at stake when a virus of this magnitude that's this contagious. Because I've seen now reports from an epidemiologist that said like the virus is able to spread in ways that we hadn't even thought before. It can spread like 20 feet away. It can aerosolize and then get through the vents, and people in their like bathroom can somehow get it through the vents. So again, the urgency is not there. So this race against time is disconcerting to me, and I just really hope that we can get this relief bill done that has the vaccine distribution mechanisms in there, to hopefully get more produced, and as long as we can do that before there's another spike and the more dangerous strain of the virus spreads. But there's just not enough standards in our country being enacted. Like a mask mandate, it's whatever. There's people still allowed to go out in public and do all this stuff. Like we just had the Super Bowl and people were crowding all around the street in Tampa. So it could be a very big mess if we don't get this under control very soon. So I just hope that we can really step things up and get it passed as soon as possible. That's all I can hope for.